Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all here in this session at TNV Academy today. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our eminent speaker, Mr. Sunil Kumar, who is going to talk to us about risk assessment and management. In this webinar today, Mr. Sunil will discuss this topic in detail along with some real-life examples he has experienced in the industry. Our distinguished speaker, Mr. Sunil Kumar, has done his post-graduation in microbiology from Himachal Pradesh University, India. He is also a lead auditor in ISO 22000 and FSSC 22000 standards. He has an industrial experience of around 10 plus years in field of manufacturing, quality assurance, quality control, and food safety management system. He has been imparting training to a number of organizations, entrepreneurs, and individuals on various topics related to ISO terminologies, their certification and implementation in various organizations. It was just a brief introduction of our guest speaker today. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Sunil Kumar. I may request Mr. Sunil Kumar now to please start the session on risk assessment and management.
Okay, hi, good afternoon to all of you. As Apoorv already shared introduction about myself, as having around total experience of around over 10 years in the different FMCG industry in a quality assurance, quality control department, and also leading the food safety management system and lead auditor for the various management system like ISO 22000, 22000, FSSC 22000, and also connecting an ISO 9001. So here today we will discuss on the topic of risk assessment and management. So here we will start with the what is risk assessment. A risk assessment is simply a careful examination of what in your work could cause harm to people so that you can weigh up whether you have taken enough precaution or should do more to prevent harm. In their source of their health and safety executive like HSC, different industry having the health and yes, safety department are there, so they are leading the risk assessment and the risk management of a particular area. So principle of risk management are that are can be defined as the eradication or minimization of the adverse effect of risk to which an organization is exposed. So here are the regulations of the management, or like the work regulations and the regulatory regulations, which are defined as the regulation 3 para 1 of the management of health and safety of work regulation 1992, that state that every employee shall take care and they make a suitable and effective assessment of like the risk to the health and safety of employee to the which they are exposed while as they are at work. And second one, the risk to the health and safety of the person not in his employment arising out of or in connection with the conduct by him or his undertaking. So for the purpose of identify the measure he need to take to comply with the requirement and prohibition imposed on him or under the relevant statutory provision. So here are the type of risk assessment. Within industry, the three type of risk assessment can be distinguished. First one is the assessment of large-scale complex hazard sites, such as those sites which are found in the process and nuclear industries. They require QRA, it is a qualitative risk. And second one is the journal assessment of complete range of workplace risk as required under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999. So these are the regulations which are applicable to the industry for the management of health and safety at the workplace. And third one, the risk management required under specific legislation, like for example, for the hazardous substances, there is COSS regulation 1988 and manual handling, that is the operational regulation 1992. So these are the type of which are regulation conducted through the government regulations. So one is the management of health and safety at the work regulation, and second the manual handling operation, that is a regulation 1992. So here is they define the risk management. So here the risk management is like activity of characterization, then the hazard identification of their characterization, then risk estimation, then we do the option analysis of that risk assessment. Because during the option analysis, you have to take the decision of that particular hazard. whether it going to be hazardous or non-hazardous. So later on, when you do the risk evaluation, initially you do the risk analysis, then you do the risk evaluation, then you do the risk reduction. Risk reduction you can done through the implementation of like monitoring, an audited review, their frequency, their regular checking, their monitoring. So through that the risk can be reduced because all these three parameters are correlated. As initially do you do the risk analysis through your activity, through the hazard identification, then risk estimation. Then when the risk evaluation, there is an option analysis, then decision making of that particular hazard or risk. Then a risk reduction. Whenever the risk is comes, you do the risk analysis, then you evaluate the risk, then you reduce the risk. So how you can reduce the risk is that through the monitoring, through the implementation of your control measure, your control action, or through your audit or reviews. So why should we do risk assessment? First one is legal requirement by the law under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999 and individual organization health and safety policies required under the Health and Safety at Work, that is Act 1974. So all of the industry, many of like food industry, like pharma industry and other industry too, they are doing the risk assessment of your particular process, particular their product, particular their raw material, particular their finished good. So they do the risk analysis at art for their all the process steps. So why they do that? Because it's a legal requirement also, it's a financial requirement also, and it's a moral also. So when you're talking about the legal requirement, because it is required by the law, that is under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999, and second one is the Health and Safety at Work, that is 1974. So because you do the risk analysis, you have to follow the government regulation like said the 1999 and 1974 Act. So you have to do the risk analysis at the site, at your premises, at your process, your raw material, your ingredient, whatever you are using in your process or whatever you are producing from that. You have to do the risk assessment of all your process parameters. Okay. And the second one is financial and less chance of claims and prosecutions. So when you are in the industry, there are many type of happening, risk happening are there. So you have to overcome, you have to avoid that. So there can be a less chances of claims and prosecution. And third one is a moral. Morals, duty of care on to all employee and other affected by our work. So third one is a moral, like every employee working in the industry, they have to obey and they have to use the follow the rules of the organizations. Through that, there not be any impact on the human health. They not impact onto their product. So that can be only avoided. Then you do the risk assessment of all your process, all your ingredients, all your flow of that material from inbound to outbound. So you have so that is why the risk assessment is necessary for the industries. So what information should a risk assessment include? That include hazard, what could be go wrong, hazard. There are many type of hazard. Like I'm talking about the food industry. There are physical hazard, biological hazard, microbiological hazard, toxins hazard, alpha toxins hazard, allergen hazards. So there are numerous numbers of hazard according to the industries. And other information that should be risk assessment include people at risk who might be harmed. Because people who are employee who are working in the area, in the process, in the production, in the timeline, in the ingredient area, so they may be imposed at a risk. So they have to be do the risk assessment of the area, their people also. So and third one is the control measure present. Have enough precaution been taken? And then further action required, that should not be done. Because whether the action you have taken for your risk assessment of your hazard, that should be completely implemented according to your risk mitigation. And fifth one is the record detail and keep the assessment under review. So here the source of that health and safety executive, but that is a step to the risk assessment guidance, that how you do the risk assessment, how you evaluate it, and who is responsible for doing the risk assessment. Your organization health and safety policy will outline who is responsible completing the risk assessment. In a school, our responsibility for ensuring risk assessment are completed in that of head teacher and government body. However, head of individual department will most likely be responsible ensuring that all reasonably foreseeable significant risks are addressed and managed effectively. There will also a line of accountability to the head teacher and government body outlined in the policy. So here is example of the any that school or colleges apart from the industry where the risk assessment are done, because it's according to the hierarchy how who do that. If we're talking about the industry, there are the health safety executive who do the risk assessment of their risk related to the safety. And I'm talking about the food safety, then there is a food safety team leader in the food industry who do the risk assessment of their hazard for their physical, biological, and chemical hazard. So, as per the industry, they are making a hiring of the person or a present of employee who do the risk assessment, because there are designated person for that who do the risk assessment of their particular hazard or risk. Are there any standard risk assessment available to you to use? Yes, there are a lot of example and model available to get you started or assist the process. Like Cyprus provide model for school on the RGF portal page and RBM internet sites. There are also special model available from CLAPS, like covering science, art, and DNT, and also covering sport and PDs, evolve covering education visit risk. So here are the number of other that portal available for the assessment of risk, because when I'm talking about the European guidelines and the UK guidelines, so you're using the RGFIL portal and also RMC internet site for the risk assessment. What risk exists in and around, like safeguard, supervision of people's and site security, educational bids, results, use, handling, storage, and transport of particle and substances, use equipments, for example, PE apparatus, use substances and solution, for example, science art, use of machinery. So these are example of the risk assessment of the schools in like colleges, and later on we will discuss about the industry also. So here's an example of the schools and colleges where the UK government and the USA government that are taking the part for the risk assessment. A risk assessment, that attitude to risk vary greatly between individuals. So a group or team approach as opposed to an individual approach is a better practice when assessing risk and establishing safe working practices. So if you're talking by the risk assessment, because attitude is always matter for an individual, that who is doing or is conducting an risk assessment or having a approach to the practices for assessing the risk and then establishing the safe working practices. It's all depend upon the individual's attitude levels. So how its attitude behavior towards the risk and to mitigate the risk, because it's vary greatly between the individuals to individual and group to group and member to member. So it's an better when an individual approach doing for the risk assessment and establish the safe working practices through the risk assessment, their evaluations, then risk reduction. How to assessing the risk, like quantitative risk assessment involve making a formal judgment on the consequences and probability using. So when we are talking about the risk is always defined as the severity into likelihood. Severity of a occurrence and likelihood of a hazard. Likelihood of occurrence, severity of, if an hazard is there, an a risk is there. So severity of risk and likelihood of occurrence. Severity of risk we can say, severity of hazard we can say, and likelihood of occurrence. Because risk having the probability cause of like severity, how many severity of that particular hazard, and what is the likelihood of that severity, that may be like critical, minor, major, it may be lethal. So it depends upon the severity, how much severity of the particular risk or hazard. And likelihood is occurrence is like how much it can be impacted, or how much it can be hazardous to the particular risk. And according to the body, human body, or any other like aspect of different variants of products. It's depend upon your product portfolio, that what product you are manufacturing and what is the role of that product. So you have to do the risk assessment according to the that severity of and their hazard and risk. We can say severity of risk or can say severity of hazard. So both the word can use severity of hazard or severity of risk, and the likelihood of occurrence. So here I'm taking example of that, how to assessing the risk. The likely effect of hazard may be example be rated as I said major, serious, slight. So effect of hazard that may be major, like major if in a death or major injury, illness causing long-term disability, and if in a serious then injurious or illness cause short-term disability, and slight is all other injuries or illness. So here we start with the like is there any major hazard there and serious hazard, then is a slight effect of hazard. So here you can assess because it's all you have to calculate basis on the likelihood of occurrence. All depend upon their severity and likelihood. If you can, the severity is like is major, serious, or slight. So here you can distinguish between the three type of their particular effect of hazard. Can say slight, it can be serious, it can be major. So depending upon their effect of hazard, you can calculate how it can be lethal or it can be less lethal to the particular process or product. The likelihood of harm may be rated as like high, medium, low. Like we start with the low, medium, or high. You can say high, medium, or low. When you're talking about the low, where the harm will seldom occur, so their chances of the occurrence will be low. Then second one is the medium, where harm will often occur. Medium means the harm is most oftenly occur. That is oftenly occur means that having a medium chances of occurrence. And third one is the high, where it is certain that harm will occur. Mean if you have any criticality of the particular product or particular process or particular ingredient is there, if their chances of their likelihood of harm is high, then we can say its harm will be occur to the body or it can be human health if we talking about the food product. So risk is equal to severity of harm into likelihood of occurrence, severity of hazard, severity of we can say. So the simple computation give a risk value of between 1 and 2, enabling a rough and ready comparison of risk. So in this case, the lower the number, the greater the risk. And so prioritize the hazard so that control action can be targeted at high risk. So when you are imposing any risk, when you check or when you analyze that you having a risk in your product, you have risk in your process, you having any risk in your ingredient. So how you have to control the risk? You have to do the risk avoidance, you have to risk retention. So when you're talking about the risk avoidance, this strategy involved a conscious decision on the part of organization to avoid completely a particular risk by discounting the operation producing the risk. For example, replacing a hazardous chemical by one with the less or no risk potential. So risk avoidance can be avoided as if any of your chemical, any of your raw material that who is giving the risk or who is having a high amount of risk, you can do one thing, you can reduce that material, you can discontinue that operation also, you can replace that material also. For example, XYZ chemical is imposing a risk to your product and you have their level can be critical and lethal and for your importing any product on into your any your product. If you're talking about the health, then it can be posing a effect on your health. So through that, when you know that this risk having the high lethal effect, so though you do one thing, you can that replace the hazard chemical by like by the less one, or by you can reduce the, or you can that replace the completely that hazardous chemical with the another one. They're having a no risk potential with that. So you have to replace with that which having no risk potential. Second one, you can control the risk through the risk retention. The risk is retained in the organization wherein a consequent risk that loss is financed by the company. There are two aspects to consider: risk retention with knowledge and risk retention without knowledge. So you can do the control the risk through the risk retention also. Then also through the risk transfer, like this refer to the legal assignment of the cost of certain potential losses from one party another. The most common way is by insurance. And the fourth one is risk reduction. Here the risks are systematically reduced through control measure according to the hierarchy of risk control described in earlier section. So risk reduction you can do through the installation of your control measure. For example, your product is giving a physical hazard like that coming a dust particle or any coming a hard particle into your raw material into your product, or any of the other foreign matter that come into your product that is a physical hazard to your product. Then you can do one thing, you can install a filtration system, you can install the separation system, so through that physical hazard can be avoided, that can be reduced. For example, there are 10 number of uh, that particle are come into your product. When you install the filter and you install the filtration system, then 10 particle out of 10, 7 or 8 will be reduced to their filtration system. So how hey you can do the one thing that you can reduce the risk through the installation of your control measure. So according to the risk, control measure are different. Like for the physical, the control measure be different. For the chemical hazard or chemical risk, there will be a different control measure. If a microbiological hazard or microbiological risk, then you have a different control measure for that. So through that you can reduce your risk. Risk management or a hazard analysis, like how to identify your hazard. There is a broad category of hazard that to help the process of identifying hazard. It's a usable to categorize hazard in different way. For example, like different because every in every aspect we talking about the ingredient, your process, your department, your ingredient portfolio, your process portfolio, your finished good, your product portfolio. So there, through the step by step the process you have, there are step by step the risk involved into your process. You can't say that we are over having the 5 process that are 5 free from the risk. There will be a different level of hazard, different level of risk to the your different process. So here are some example of that. For example, in you having in a mechanical, so in mechanical you're using your that equipment, you're in a mechanical force or mechanical equipment, you're using that, there should be a risk of that. For example, they're having a safety risk, they're having a like not running or less running risk. So the second one is electrical. In electrical, they're having loose wires, loose plugs. So there are a risk of that also. So there's a safety risk involved into that. Third one is the radiation. So radiation that can, if they're in an open way, that can be imposed to the human body or human health. So there is a risk of that to the human body. And fourth one is substances. A different type of substances are there and different type of hazard available into their substances. Then fire explosion. So there is also these are also a risk to the human health. Several input can support the process of hazard identification. For example, known hazard from the from the past experience. For example, you know that in this material having this type of hazard, or in this material this type of hazard, because historical data is also explained about the risk, because that product is already, that ingredient is already imposing a hazard to the body or human health. So there are the past experience of that also involved. So throughout you can identify your hazard. So external information including like epidemiological and other historical data, information of hazard in food chain, etc. Like in general hazard identification, as we earlier discussed, for biological hazard, physical hazard, chemical hazard. And this can be done from the following 5 sources. For example, for the equipment, to the material, improper processing, environment, human activity. The hazard can be related to like chemical, raw material, technology, method, process, operational condition, pressure, time, temperature, humidity conditions, premises. So here we start with the first example, like equipment. So every equipment having a different type of hazard. We can say if an equipment having nut and bolt, and the equipment having any type of other material that can dug into the product. So that are the that act as a physical hazard to the product, because any equipment who containing any type of nut bolt, any other bolt, any other loose buttons or loose wires. So these are all type of hazard that may be related to the that is food physical hazard. And if you're having any loose wire, loose plug, that is importing a safety hazard. So every equipment in the industry using that, there are a different type of hazard involved into that, because that equipment may be used for the processing, so there may be hazard during the processing. During processing, if any chemical added into that equipment, so there will be a chemical hazard through that equipment. So it's depend upon the type of the process you are using and type of equipment you are using, because it's all depend how it's you are implemented at your site levels or you implemented into your organizations. So the different the sources, what are the sources of the hazard, like as said, the equipment also, a material also. In the material, for example, in a raw material you're using, there should be a different type of hazard, maybe the chemical, physical, biological, and allergen also. For example, if any soybean, for example, soybean milk solids are in the material using into the industry or food industry, so they're having a physical hazard can be there, it can be biological hazard can be there, chemical hazard can be there, and allergen hazard can be there. So improper processing also can lead to a hazard. In environment different type of hazard available. For example, if I'm talking about the environment, there are different type of microflora, microorganism present. So this is a biological hazard. And fifth one is the human activity. So, for example, any human activity they are which are doing intentionally or unintentionally, that we can say about the food fraud or food events. If I'm talking about the food industries, so human activity also a source of the major source of the risk, because as we already discussed, uh, the human behavior is a major part for their risk. How he is behaving to the risk, how is imposing to the risk, and how is held importing into the particular risk. So hazard can be related to like chemical, as we discussed, raw materials, their ingredients, material, installation, technical devices, technology and method, process, operational condition, pressure, time, temperature, humidity condition, premises. So this can be a type of a hazard here. So when you are talking about the risk analysis, then you have to do the selection of the control measure also. Once you do the risk analysis, then you have to also install the control measure for that particular risk. So more than one control measure is often required to control the defined food safety hazard, or more than one food that can be controlled by specific control measure. It is advisable to select the appropriate combination of control measure. So mostly the effect will depend upon the rigorous in which the control measure applied. For example, the effect of sanitization activity for a table will depend upon the number of time it has been applied. Whether once in a day or twice in a day is expected that the control measure evaluated before implementation. So here's example of that. How you do the control measure, how you implement the control measure. Once you know that there is a risk of a microorganism into the table. If a table is dirty, there will be a number of microorganism gathering at the table. So you have to reduce a how risk. How you reduce the risk? You will clean that table with the sanitizer, with the soap, or any of the detergent also you can use. But you have to clean that table. If you don't clean the table, there will be chances of physical hazard also. Because if any type of dust available on that table, it will be a physical hazard, and also it will be a biological hazard, because in the soil and the number of microorganisms, potting of that dust into the particular table, it can lead to a microbiological hazard. So you have to reduce that hazard. How you can reduce? You have to do the cleaning of that table, clean in a day, or thrice in a day. It's depend upon the frequency and depend upon how it can be eliminated. For example, if you're cleaning once in a day, mean you said that if I clean once in a day, it will be a clean, and it will look like clean and also clean a whole day. If you said I have to clean it to 2 or 3 times, then it will be a clean. So it's depend how you mitigate the risk and how you reduce the risk. You said that there is a dust risk, So how you reduce the dust? You said that I will clean once in a day or twice in a day, depend upon how the risk is. Categorization of control measure, that following the parameter for assessment and categorization of control measure. So the likelihood of occurrence and severity of their consequence in case of failure, like the effect on identify significant food safety hazard, the location in relation to the other control measure. So here the risk matrix, the how you do the risk assessment of particular hazard. So if their severity is like low, medium, or high, so it's you have to done the severity of their hazard into the probability of hazard. So risk is always equal to severity into probability or likelihood of occurrence. You can use probability also. You can use likelihood also. So both of the term are same. You can use the probability. Probability also a chances of that. Likelihood means how much it can be impacted. And severity is that mean how much it will be lethal or it can be critical, it can be hazardous. So risk is always equal to severity into probability or likelihood of hazard. Severity of hazard into probability of hazard or likelihood of hazard. Whether you can use both the word probability or likelihood. So reduce, not eliminate. A common misperception to the risk that is should be eliminated. We should be taking well managed and planned this, not eliminate all of them wherever possible. However, in extreme cases, elimination is the only solution or answer. So here we say that when you are talking about the reduction of the particular hazard, you can't complete it at a maximum or can be 100 level. So you have to that is a common misperception to the risk. That everybody say that risk it can be it's reduced at 100 level. We can say that we should be can take it as a well managed and planned risk. So not eliminate all of them wherever possible, as we all know. However, in extreme cases, the elimination is the only answer, only solution for that. So what if we get it wrong? There is no much thing as perfect risk assessment. We all make mistakes and have error of judgment. Once you discover that something is not right, rectify it. Risk assessment are living document and should be amended to move with progress and change. So there is so much thing as we say that the risk, the perfect risk assessment that we all know that we all do the mistakes and having the error of the judgment while doing the risk because everybody think or everybody perception at their own level. No, not using the same perception and same individuality level of the risk assessment of everybody having that because there is enormous things as a perfect risk assessment is done by anybody because we all know that we having the different level of perception with the everybody. If I do the risk assessment of particular job, I will do the rating of according to my risk perception. If I will say that I know that having knowledge of that having I see the historical data that this point can be imposed at this amount of risk or this much this proportion of risk. So there is no such thing a perfect risk assessment. So we know that everybody do the risk assessment on their own perception level. So because all these risk assessment are living document, and because when you do the risk assessment, for example, anybody told me that do the risk assessment of that particular hazard or particular risk or particular process. So I will do according to my perception. For example, I say I think that this material imposing a physical hazard at low level, or this product is that imposing a chemical hazard at medium level, and this process or this product impose a biological hazard at maximum level. So I will do as per the perception and risk of their particular hazard, at how much the severity of that particular hazard and the likelihood of the occurrence of their particular hazard. Because the risk you mitigate the risk through only the two parameter, that severity of hazard and their their likelihood of occurrence, how much occurrence of their, it may be the low or it may be medium, it may be high, and the severity that is may be low, that is minor, that may be major, they may be critical. Okay, so to that you are decide the risk, that which one risk is major to the particular particular process, particular product, or particular raw material. And how often should risk assessment be reviewed? The law requires that a risk assessment should be reviewed periodically. It is up to the employee to decide on a frequency of risk assessment review annually at least. So you do the risk assessment review, that is depend that how you do the review of their, because every manuals say different. So if you're using the QMS system like quality management system, food safety management system, a different management system, so they having a on requirement of that the risk assessment should be reviewed annually, at least annually. So it's up to the employer. They want to decide the frequency of their particular their hazard assessment or risk assessment. They can be done it a quarterly basis, they can be done it on a 6 monthly basis, they can be done twice in a year, and they can be in a once in a year. So depend upon the employers and the laws and the regulation also, because if they are using into the particular state or country, so it's depend upon the type of the hazard they are doing the particular assessment of particular hazard. The risk assessment must be also be reviewed if there is any significant incident or major injury. For example, person is sent to hospital, this time of the circumstances setting such have changed. So risk assessment must be reviewed in a significant incident. Like for example, is that saying that if an injury of any person is during the any process or during any manufacturing or during any activity of the processing, so that person should be sent to hospital, and if the time is off their circumstances like that, so because that setting that should have to be changed, because when you do the risk assessment you're doing the review of that, because a particular person is having a major injury and that person is sent to the hospital, so that risk assessment should be reviewed as per that on the spot also, and also after the incident happened immediately. So whether we can get advice from like colleagues in college and schools, because where the in this whole colleges they as the UK and other countries their risk assessment are doing by the college and schools headmasters and local authority advisor, where the local regulations and regulatory like legal regulation are there, and expert bodies like lectures, AFPs, etc., and also the industry colleagues and expert, and also the regulation of the Act 1974 and 1999. So, thank you. We'll look forward to experience a transforming journey with you. If you have any question or query, you can clearly ask.
Yeah, Mr. Sunil, I have a question. Is a risk assessment a legal requirement?
Yes, risk assessment is a legal requirement as per the Act of like Management and Health Risk and Safety 1992 and the 1999.
Thank
You
you,
have
sir.
to do the risk assessment. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have one more question. Yeah,
Sure, sure.
yeah. What training and qualification need to prepare a risk assessment?
Okay. Yes, yes, please. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. What training and qualification need to prepare a risk assessment?
What training and
Any training and qualification need to prepare a risk assessment?
you, no, for the risk assessment, you have to be aware for the risk assessment regulation of their Act 1974 and 1999, and you have should be aware of how you do the risk assessment of particular hazard and how to the risk matrix. You should be aware about the risk matrix and the risk identification of how you have to mitigate the have you calculate the risk, so you should be aware of that. You can take a training of that particular risk assessment and risk that standards of risk assessment also. So throughout you can easily avail to use the risk assessment of particular your hazard into the your organization or in your process.
Thank you, sir.
You can calculate, but you should have a template of that, and you should have training of that, and you should be aware of that. Because without awareness, without any training, you can't do the risk assessment. If you do without training, without any standards knowledge, then a risk assessment should be that risk assessment may be minimal. You can't take your risk as like if any critical risk is there, maybe without training or without assessment you can declare that critical to the minor. So you have to do that awareness training and you can.
Hello, sir. I have a question.
Yes,
Sir,
yes.
is the risk
Yes.
assessment and hazard analysis are the same things or both are different?
No, risk assessment and hazard analysis are the same. Actually, risk is hazard is like that is imposed to the health, is related to the health. You can say hazard.
Okay.
Yeah, because risk is can be safety risk, it can be local risk. Then hazard, when you're talking about the hazard, that is always related to your human health.
That's the basic difference.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a question as well.
Okay.
Sir, is it mandatory for the organizations to document the risk assessment process and their results?
Yes, it depend upon that. For example, if you are taking a management certification of ISO 9000, if you're in the food industry, then you're taking FSMS, food safety management system. So then you have to do the risk analysis as per the standard and the standard requirement. For example, in ISO 22000 clause number 7.2 is hazard identification, that is HACCP plan. In HACCP plan, you have to prepare the risk assessment of your particular process, your raw material, also your transportation, your dispatch, and all your process. You have to do the risk assessment of each and every steps. So that is depend upon which type of certification you are taking and certification you are going to taken. So it's depend upon. And normally you have also do the risk analysis of your particular product and process also, so that you can minimize the risk into your industries. If you don't taking the risk assessment of your process or your raw material or ingredient, then you can't reduce the risk into your process. You have to do the risk assessment of your particular process and your materials.
Thank you so much.
And second, thank you.
Do anyone has any more questions? Any of the participants?
No, sir.
I guess none of the participants has any other questions now. So I would conclude this particular webinar session today. Thank you, Mr. Sunil, for this wonderful webinar at the first. The way you have shared your insights and knowledge on today's topic was really interesting. I hope that all the participants has been benefited by your expertise and wisdom on the topic which you shared today. Thank you for giving your valuable time and effort to make this webinar a successful one. I also thank all my participants who were a part of this particular webinar. Without you, this particular webinar would have has been hope to see you all again soon. I wish all of you very best of luck on behalf of TNV Academy for all your future endeavors. Thank you so much. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for the sessions, and thanks to all of the participant and Apu for the behalf of TNB. So thanks to all of you. And if you have
I request
any other query in future, you can ask anytime.
definitely, sir. I request all the participants to leave the meeting now. Thank you so much.